whom he shared with his first wife, Faye Maltese, as his heirs, according to the outlet. As for Betsy, her will included a provision that her and Hackman's deaths be considered simultaneous if they occurred within 90 days of one another, in which case her assets would be given to charity, according to TMZ.
Everyone assumed the Hackman family would slip into private mourning when Gene Hackman passed away. At first, it seemed like they would issue a short statement, accept heartfelt condolences, and quietly fade from public view. Yet, in a twist no one anticipated, the family found itself at the center of a swirling controversy that soon involved courtrooms, media outlets, and stunned fans around the world. What began as a presumed natural passing at the age of 95 turned into a tangled web of accusations and unanswered questions.
In court documents filed alongside Hackman's will, Peters listed the actor's 3 children, Christopher Allen Hackman, Elizabeth Jean Hackman, and Leslie Ann Hackman.
Especially after Gene's son, Christopher, mentioned something about a possible gas leak that nobody else had heard of. Was this just a misunderstanding or a clue that something far more complicated was going on? Today, we're delving into the hidden truths and startling revelations that emerged after the passing of one of Hollywood's most iconic names. In the days following Gene Hackman's death, the family's request for privacy felt ordinary.
When police arrived at their home in a gated community, the front door was open when they arrived at the residence, though they noted no sign of forced entry.
No one thought much of it. Gene, after all, had been in retirement for years, preferring peace in the serene landscapes of Santa Fe over the bright lights of Hollywood. At his age, the final chapter of his life seemed free from scandal. However, just 2 days later, everything changed when Christopher Hackman casually mentioned to a local reporter that a gas leak might have contributed to his father's condition. He didn't present proof, and he didn't elaborate on how or when he noticed this issue. That single remark ignited a firestorm of speculation, overshadowing what many believed was simply a peaceful ending.
It is so important that we show up for them so that they can continue to show up for their person. I think that there's this common misconception that
to a long and successful life. People who read the story online had immediate questions. Why didn't any official reports mention a gas leak? Why had no one else in the household, like nurses or other caretakers, spoken up about it? To make matters even more confusing, Christopher gave no detailed follow-up. This left the public and the media to draw their own conclusions, and what began as a slow trickle of rumors swiftly grew into a steady stream of suspicion.
There are also a lot of other noteworthy things to pay attention to. As I mentioned, Hackman's wife was discovered in the bathroom. A deputy saw a black space heater near her head.
Reporters began digging into the details, and fans demanded more information about Gene Hackman's final weeks. The more people searched for answers, the more contradictions they found. As journalists pored over medical documents, interviews, and any statement they could find, conflicting stories began to surface. Official records didn't support the notion of a sudden environmental threat.
How one of the couple's dogs may have died. We do. Officials believe that he most likely died of dehydration and starvation. The Australian Kelpie mix named Xena was found near Betsy's body in a crate.
Neighbors recalled no emergency visits from the fire department, and no caretaker ever submitted complaints about unusual smells or suspicious conditions. Meanwhile, Christopher stood by his claim that something felt off in the house during those final days. He mentioned noticing peculiar odors, yet there was no corroboration from professionals who might have investigated a leak. At the same time, a separate but equally mystifying layer emerged: the gap between how Christopher described his father's mental state and what others close to Gene had experienced.
And according to local police, she had signs of mummification. Santa Fe cops went to perform a welfare check on the two of them after a concerned neighbor alerted them that something was off.
Some caretakers recalled him having moments of genuine clarity, discussing old memories, asking about ongoing projects, and voicing opinions on everyday matters. Christopher, though, had repeatedly emphasized how his father could hardly recognize anyone. The tension created by these mixed accounts lingered like a fog that refused to lift. People couldn't decide if Christopher was a grieving son struggling to make sense of an emotional loss, or if he might be intentionally spinning a story for reasons no one yet understood. Despite the whispers of confusion and contradiction, one aspect of Gene Hackman's life was never in doubt. He planned meticulously. Throughout his Hollywood career, he was known for being thorough, choosing roles with care, seldom offering interviews, and often shying away from the social spotlight. After retirement, he dedicated himself to writing, painting, and enjoying the tranquility of his home away from Tinseltown.
Cloudberry spokesperson saying she was not a patient of the service, but called on the 12th to inquire about what they described as an esoteric treatment, adding that the caller did not display any signs of acute distress.
Part of that careful approach extended to his personal affairs. Close friends claim that Gene left behind an organized system that documented what he wanted for his funeral arrangements, how he hoped to distribute his wealth, and precisely which charities mattered to him most. By all accounts, Gene's original will, last fully updated over a decade before his passing, reflected those values. He wanted some of his favorite charities to receive continuing support. He included trust funds for grandchildren and close relatives, ensuring they would be cared for but not overly indulged. And he particularly stressed that no single person should wield absolute control over his estate. Many believed these guidelines would prevail unchallenged. So, when a new will appeared, supposedly signed less than a year before his death, jaws dropped. No one expected that the famously cautious Gene Hackman would have changed so many key details in the final stretch of his life. According to official records, the revised will was properly notarized and signed by witnesses.
The spokesperson says they called her back twice to follow up, but did not reach her. Officials believe Betsy died of the hantavirus.
It eliminated significant donations Gene had once insisted upon, slightly altered some trust fund terms, and, crucially, granted Christopher more direct control. In addition, the updated version removed a clause that had originally safeguarded Gene's estate should he be deemed mentally unfit, something that Alzheimer's or advanced age might trigger. Naturally, the question arose, did Gene knowingly authorize these changes, or did someone with access to his private affairs orchestrate them? Investigators scrutinized emails, phone logs, and statements from people close to the Hackman household. As they uncovered more, the timeline became suspicious. Christopher had apparently scheduled every doctor's appointment, decided who could visit his father, and handled any legal correspondences, all within a window when Gene's health was said to be declining. But was Christopher overstepping boundaries or simply shouldering a heavy family responsibility?
Liz, what are some of the other outstanding questions that investigators are exploring?
Yeah, well, investigators say that they have most of the major answers, but they are still considering this an open investigation.
Doubt had crept into every conversation by this point. For critics, the evidence looked like a carefully executed plan, especially when the newly revised will placed a considerably larger share of Gene's wealth and control over intellectual property into Christopher's hands. Supporters of Christopher countered that, given Gene's advanced age, it was sensible to grant his only son the ultimate authority over personal affairs. The result was a tense standoff, fueled by rumors that Christopher might have manipulated his father to secure a more advantageous inheritance. As the swirling questions refused to die down, it was only a matter of time before the dispute escalated into a legal battle. Soon enough, attorneys representing other family members and interested parties pushed to clarify Gene's final intentions. Media gathered outside the courthouse in Santa Fe, turning what had been a local legal proceeding into a national spectacle.
Hackman was 95 years old. His wife, Betsy, was 64. Earlier reports put her age at 63.
Prosecutors didn't accuse Christopher of a specific crime at first. They simply demanded a thorough examination of the new will. Yet, their stance grew sharper as they discovered unsettling information. They pointed to three major issues: Christopher's complete control over the household, contradictions in how he described Gene's mental state, and the potential motivation of increased wealth and power. Emails surfaced in which Christopher described his father as barely coherent, while in others he appeared to consult Gene on all sorts of day-to-day decisions. The stark difference between these portrayals ignited suspicions that Christopher was framing his father's mind as fragile for legal gain, while still capitalizing on Gene's lucidity whenever it suited him. Inside the courtroom, tension soared. People wanted to know, did Christopher genuinely believe he was preserving Gene's dignity and privacy, or had he systematically isolated him to influence the terms of the will? Journalists described the scene as a standoff between conflicting versions of reality.
Janae, this is a major development in the timeline deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy. Officials initially believed she may have passed away as early as February 11th, but we now know she was alive on the 12th.
Some watchers even said it felt more like a riveting movie script than a real trial. But the emotional stakes were very real, especially for the Hackman family watching from the pews. Everything changed the day Christopher took the stand. He spoke in measured tones, occasionally pausing as though unsure how much he should reveal. As the attorneys pressed him on his father's health, he admitted that he might have overstated Gene's confusion in some official documents. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone, Christopher acknowledged that he had considered safeguarding Gene's legacy by steering how the final will was written. He didn't claim to have falsified anything outright, yet his words implied that he interpreted Gene's wishes in a way that might have gone beyond normal caretaker responsibilities. Some onlookers wept openly in the courtroom. They saw in Christopher a grieving son, trying desperately to shield his father from the pain and confusion of old age. Others viewed him as a cunning manipulator who exploited Gene's declining condition to rewrite the star's final chapter. In that single moment, Christopher's carefully curated image, an unassuming, loyal son who shunned Hollywood's glare, began to fracture. Uncertainty rippled through the crowd like a wave. People whispered, did he really do it to protect Gene? Or was he after something else all along? Support for Christopher fluctuated wildly in public forums and across social media. Those sympathetic to him argued that managing a loved one's affairs can be a messy, emotionally overwhelming process. Critics countered that if Christopher was indeed well-intentioned, why had he tried to keep so many aspects of his father's condition under wraps? And why bring up a mysterious gas leak that no one else could substantiate? Long before a verdict was reached, the court of public opinion was in full swing. Morning shows trotted out legal experts to talk about elder abuse and how families sometimes manipulate ailing relatives. Late-night hosts slipped in references to the strange Hackman case, while true crime podcasts recounted every detail of the trial, dissecting Christopher's demeanor and motives. Ordinary people saw echoes of their own dilemmas in the story. How do you balance caring for a parent's needs and privacy with ensuring you respect their genuine, personal wishes? To some viewers, Christopher appeared burdened by the weight of decisions he made in solitude. They imagined him pacing through his father's house, anxious about financial matters, uncertain how to keep everything afloat if Gene's memory continued to fade. To others, he was simply a man who used his father's diminished capacity as a chance to seize an inheritance. The media painted him in drastically different lights. One newspaper ran an editorial titled, "A Son Torn Between Duty and Desire," whereas another offered a scathing piece accusing him of betrayal. Community leaders, senior advocates, and medical professionals also weighed in, using the Hackman story to raise awareness about the vulnerability of older adults. Cautionary tales circulated about unscrupulous caregivers and relatives who gradually isolate the elderly, rewriting their legacies for personal gain. People who once saw Christopher as a model of quiet dignity now questioned his motives, analyzing every statement he'd ever made about Gene's final months. Even the mention of a gas leak took on new meaning. Was it a desperate attempt to explain away an unexplained death? Or had Christopher genuinely believed his father's health was compromised by a hidden danger? As the court reached its decision, Christopher faced no outright criminal penalty, yet the uproar surrounding him remained unresolved in the public eye. The official ruling noted that while the will was legally binding, the changes and circumstances leading up to Gene Hackman's death were suspicious enough to cause lingering doubt. Consequently, parts of the estate were placed under stricter oversight, ensuring the grandchildren and named charities wouldn't be disadvantaged if future evidence revealed further misconduct. In the end, what truly emerged wasn't just a story about a Hollywood legend or a single family struggle, but a cautionary tale about how easily legacies can be distorted when lines blur between genuine caregiving and self-interest. The gas leak theory that Christopher once floated is still debated. Some dismiss it as a red herring, while others believe it might have been an excuse for his father's mysterious final decline. Yet the script of Gene Hackman's life, carefully honed by the actor himself for decades, ended on a note he likely never intended. A swirl of courtroom battles, teary confessions, and fractured public trust. For those who witnessed the saga, it remains a powerful reminder. Even the strongest bonds can buckle under the weight of fear, pressure, and secrets. Even the best-intentioned protections can look like manipulation from another angle. Christopher's confession, whether rooted in honesty, desperation, or both, transformed a quiet Hollywood farewell into a nationwide conversation about how fragile final wishes can become. At the end of it all, fans of Gene Hackman's brilliant career are left to remember the man who gave the world so many unforgettable performances, while the controversies of his last days loom like shadows, reminding us that real life doesn't always mirror the graceful endings we see on screen. If you found this story as riveting as many did, take a moment to reflect on how trust, transparency, and clarity are crucial, especially when a loved one's final chapter unfolds. In a world where legal documents, healthcare decisions, and personal ambitions often collide, Gene Hackman's legacy stands as a testament to the delicate balance between preserving a legend and respecting the truth. The question of Christopher's motives might never be fully answered, but the lessons learned from this tale will likely resonate for years to come.